take notes, and let's start this thing out right. Any veterans in the audience, please stand up. Thank you for your service. We got two groups I'd like to recognize. The first one is in the very back there. Would the eco-servants please stand up? I have a staff of 5 here to take care of 40% of the village and 23 buildings. Without those young men and women, we wouldn't be able to make it look like it does, and we want to thank them. The other group is sitting right here. There are volunteers that work all summer from us, April to October, and they're the ones that keep the Tunstall store and the Dr. Woods house open. Without this group, those buildings wouldn't be open. So thank you all. A while back, my boss, Richard Sims, came to me and said, what if we did residence in Lincoln this summer in fall? And I said, what are you talking about, Richard? And he said, you know, like artist in residence and historian in residence and that kind of thing. And we decided that'd be a great idea. And so we cast a wide net, and he said, well, who would you want for historian? And I said, well, the first person I'd ask would be Fred Nolan. And so we contacted him, and he graciously has spent the last 3 weeks here doing research, doing talks. Tomorrow he'll be meeting with my staff, and then Thursday he's going to Ruidosa to meet with Ian and your Ruidosa Lincoln County Board class. And so it was a magnificent opportunity. And part of Fred's contract was to give a public talk. So that's why we're here this afternoon. You know, I had the best job in the state of New Mexico as being the manager here. And when I'm not dealing with crumbling adobe or travel forms or that kind of thing, we get to talk about history. And one of the intangible things is not knowing a lot about the Lincoln County Board and the people involved. We know some of it, but some of it's just a guess. For example, is there more than one photograph of Billy the Kid? Was he a father of offspring? You know, things like that we're dealing with all the time, and we're learning more and more as we go. And so this afternoon, Mr. Nolan and his 2 researchers are going to share with you some evidence that they think they found Billy's early history. So you didn't come to hear me talk, you came to hear Fred talk. So Mr. Nolan, what if we knew where Billy was born and his lineage?
First of all, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good to hear that. I'm sorry about that. I wanted to start off by thanking you for inviting me here. It's a very great honor.
I can't hear
You can't? You want me to speak like that better?
Yeah.
Oh, hell. Heidi and I, my wife and I, have been coming here since 1971. And things have changed enormously in this town since our first visit here, when a very charming lady, Belle Wilson, who was in charge of the Murphy Nolan store, as I insist upon calling it, told us that, you know, I always felt that John Tunstall was a bit of a pinty waist. And bearing in mind that I was his biographer, I didn't really think that was very funny. One of the things that I get most constantly asked is, what's an Englishman doing being an expert on Billy the Kid? And I have to tell you, it was not easy. back in 1953, I had a damaged leg, which, funnily enough, I got one to go right here now to put me in the mood to remind me of what it was like. And so what I did, I started to work my way through the public library, from A to Z, that we bought. And I did all the fiction, and then I turned to the non-fiction. And when I got to B, I came across a book called The Saga of Billy the Kid by Walter Noble Burns. And I could not believe that such a wonderful story had been neglected like this, that it had only just been published. I didn't know that it had come out in 1920 something, you understand. And I immediately went to my little desk where I did my reading and writing, and wrote a letter to the Lord Mayor of Lincoln. Now, though you giggle as you may, in my country, the Lord Mayor is a very important person, and probably the most powerful one in the county or the state, as the case may be. I didn't know that, in fact, the population of Lincoln was 72, and Lord Mayors were a little thin on the ground. However, I did get a reply, and the letter came from a lady called, I have to look at her name, Nan Boylan. Does anybody remember the name Nan Boylan?
Yes.
Yes? She was a delightful lady. I did get to meet her later. And she sent me a photograph of Billy the Kid. I don't know if any of you were around, like my friend Bob McCubbin here, who is smiling knowing what comes next. If you saw a photograph of Billy the Kid in the 1950s, he looked like something left over from the death of the zombies. And I could not believe that anything so unfriendly, let's put it that way, could be Billy the Kid. So I wrote back and said, who can tell me more about this wonderful, take every chance, do everything, be who you want to be, young fella. And they put me on to a man called Robert Mullin. And Robert Mullin at that time was the preeminent researcher into the life and times of Billy the Kid, and was very kind to me indeed. So much so that I feel very guilty to be here today to perhaps throw a little bit of doubt onto a lot of the research that he did. However, I'm not going to make a life story of this because it really is a long one, and you haven't got that much time to play with anyway, have you? I decided to find out myself. So 4 years later, I'm now the founder of the English Chorale of the Westerners, and editor-publisher of the magazines that they published once a month, and a correspondent of Robert Mullin, Philip Rash, Bill Kelleher, and most important of all, Maurice Garland Fulton. I somehow managed to transfer the burden of my greatest opponent into something good. My greatest opponent was not the lack of information, it was not the lack of historians, it was the fact that there was a thing called the Atlantic Ocean between me and here. And in those days, young boys living in Liverpool, in post-war Liverpool, were not likely to get on a sailing ship and get to Lincoln County. That took a great deal longer. Old Colonel Fulton, when he found out about I got really cross with all of these experts because one of the things I had said to them was, John H. Tunstall, what was his middle name? And nobody could tell me. And I thought, well, that's crazy. And suddenly I discovered, in the act of deciding that that was crazy, I discovered the solution to the barrier. I couldn't get across the Atlantic But what I could do was bring the Atlantic to me, because I could go down to the document centre in London and find out who John H. Tunstall was, like that. And so I did. It was Henry, by the way, as you all know now. And then I did the next best thing, which was to say, I wonder if the British government has got any record at all of the case that the Tunstall family made against the United States to try to recover all the money that he brought to this country and completely lost. And so I wrote to our Foreign Office, that's your State Department, and they wrote back and said, yes, we've got a bundle of stuff about that. And so suddenly, I had crossed the Atlantic backwards, and I became the leading historian of John Tunstall and the Lincoln County War, which was kind of funny. And happily, I was also able to meet the family. I was very subtle here. You know, you guys who are interested in doing research might want to know this trick. I went to London and I telephoned everybody whose name was Tunstall. And one of them was his sister. And I said, oh, I have waited so long to talk to you. And she said words to the effect of, get lost. Because they didn't want to talk about it because they felt that they'd been cheated by the American government. And that the money that John Tunstall had installed in this part of the world had just disappeared. Nobody really understood what had gone on in the Lincoln County War because, as you all know, from all of the books that have come out in those 30, 40 years since, tell us what happened. They went, as somebody once so beautifully put it, I think it was Boss. What was that guy's name, the gangster in New York? Boss Tweed said, when asked where had all the money gone that belonged to the government, he said, where the woodbine twineth. And that's where everything had gone in this particular set of circumstances. Okay, moving right along, as you say, the next thing I thought, well, I know all of this stuff, maybe I'd better write a book about it. The only problem was I didn't know how to write a book. So I did, quite shamelessly, what you would do and what I did. I just copied everybody else. Not so much the material, but the way they did it. So the book came out, and really, I think, changed things. Because when we finally got here to Lincoln, and met Bell, who said about Mr. Tunstall being a bit of panty-waist, at that time, folks, and this is 1970, the preponderance of feeling about who was the good guy in the Lincoln County War was Murphy Dolan. And Tunstall and McSween got just what was coming to them. Somehow I think my book had a little effect in changing that particular viewpoint. And all of the people who came along afterwards kind of hewed to it. And these days, the situation is almost the opposite of that now, that John Tunstall and McSween were in fact in the right, mostly. And that Murphy Dolan and Johnny, all of the bandits that they had, and Jimmy Dolan were the bad guys. And in actual fact, as we all know, everybody here has been through some kind of a war. And there is no simple conclusion to be drawn from what happens in it by saying, well, those are the good guys and those were the bad guys. We think by far that the worst thing that we could possibly say about Adolf Hitler was that he was a good guy. But there's a lot of people of his historical bent who will tell you that there was a great deal to be said for what he was doing at the time. You pay your money and you take your choice, as we say in London. Dissolve to 1983. Gosh, that seemed nothing like yesterday. I decided to scratch an old biographical itch and come up with the answer to my own question: who was Alexander McSween? And you know, to this day, I am still baffled. He is an absolute enigma. You don't know where he's from, you don't know what he thought. He gave away some of his emotions, I think, in some of the letters that I've seen, thanks to my good friend Bob McCubbin. But he's a mystery, still, to all of us. And the manner of his death was so bizarre that we still, I think, haven't quite come to terms with it. However, it is what it is, as my son always tells me. What happened was that the Tunstall's came to the rescue again. They moved, they were quite a wealthy family, as you probably all know. They decided to move some shelving in a room that wasn't used very much, and in the big house that they owned in the south of England. And when they took the shelves away, they discovered that there was a compartment in the wall, and in the wall they found all the letters that had come from Lincoln County to them in the years following John Tunstall's death, including everything that Alexander McSween wrote. And boy, what a revelation that was. So, what I'm really trying to say all the way through here is that this business of what happened back then is an ongoing one. It's very important to remember that the stuff we knew yesterday is still just as important as what we may decide is a good thing today. And I don't know, I'm still getting used to the idea of all this happening to me. I'm just a kid from Liverpool who somehow or other stumbled into this whole proposition. And what the hell am I doing in Lincoln telling you people who lived here all your lives what happened? Anyway, in 1992, I put it all on the line. I thought I would write the book about the Lincoln County War. And I have to say, in retrospect, that I had a wonderful time doing it. And that I think also it helped quite a lot of people who were interested in the subject to find a way into the story that was inimical to other people, but just what they were looking for. So a year or so ago, I'm going to read this because it still brings tears to my eyes when I read it, because I'm so stupid. I finally got around 3 or 4 years ago to paying my respects to the man who made it all possible, Maurice Garland Fulton. Still, in my mind, the greatest and most successful researcher into those troubled times, better than anyone before or since. I only wish I could have met him face to face. But I didn't know then, as I do now, how to turn my disadvantage, the Atlantic Ocean, into an advantage. It was only when I went into the writing game to make money, which you do not do if you write about the Lincoln County War. So the best I could do was to visit his grave in Roswell. And you know, but can I tell it? Would you mind if I tell them the story about you? Morgan Nelson, my dear friend of many years, took me to find Colonel Fulton's grave. And in the proceeds, he wandered off on his own and then came back and said in a kind of a surprised way, "Do you know there's more people I know in here than there are outside?" I couldn't help, when I stood by his grave, to wonder whether he would have been proud of me for the work I did, or mad at me for not having done it his way. And we're never going to know the answer to that one. It is an ongoing job that eats weeks and months and years of your life. And it's done by fanatics. And all of you are guilty of fanaticism by being here listening to it. So let me tell you, we are now going to turn to our Muttons. Billy the Kid. Did the experts get his life right or wrong? It looks like to us that the answer is yes, they did get it wrong. More than 50 years ago, two highly respected historians, Robert Mullin and Philip Rash, published some sensational news. They had, they said, found records of the marriage of Billy the Kid's mother, Catherine McCarty, and a man called William H. Andrew, who, on an April day in 1873, were pronounced man and wife at the First Presbyterian Church of Santa Fe. There were two marriage certificates, the first for the records of the church, and the second for the official records of the territory of New Mexico. Apart from the minister, his wife, and a young woman of the same name, I'm told that they didn't have children. I thought that was their daughter. And the witnesses who endorsed the marriage records, who were Henry McCarty, Joseph in one document, or Josie McCarty as the second, and Harvey Edmonds as the third. Rationalizing this discovery, Mullin and Rash concluded two of the witnesses must be, in fact, Catherine McCarty's sons, Henry and Joseph, and that Harvey Edmonds was probably a church member who occasionally obliged as a witness. Whereupon, not only was, shall we say, that was something of an iffy project, an iffy proposal, warmed, but nonetheless warmly welcomed into the historical calendar. It remained largely unchallenged as fact for more than 50 years. In other words, till now. It's well known, among writers anyway, that when you're writing fiction or even history, there's a way of having a mind game which we call what if. What if X happened, which would have changed the world? 3 years ago, when returning yet again to the subject of Billy the Kid's origins, I pitched into such a mind game myself and asked, what if Mullin and Rash were wrong? What if the witnesses at the wedding were not the future Billy the Kid and his brother Joe? And if, indeed, that was so, who were they? Finding the answer for those questions is complex and inordinately slow. It's a slow procedure, as any of you who's done home finding of your own predecessors or past years of the history of the other people that you're interested in. The answer is always the same, that this is a complex and inordinately slow procedure, as I said. But after a 3-year odyssey of searching for them, what emerges, first, foremost, and most obvious, is that Mullin and Rash were totally wrong. The non-secular members of the wedding were neither Billy the Kid or his brother Joe. Like the bride, all three were adult kinfolk. All we had to do now was find them. And I was in the great fortunate position of knowing two of the best trackers in the world. And I'd like to introduce them to you now. My dear friend Susan on the left here, and Gary on the right. Susan, tell you the best of the story.
Slow getting around on one leg.
Tell me about it.
I'd like to make a brief message out that what's who and my interest in Lincoln County is. Well, we found out 20 years ago he had two uncles from this area, and some of you probably have heard of them. The first uncle he had was named J.J. Nolan, and his second uncle was Emil Fritz, the deputy sheriff, young Emil. So that's how our interest got going. My brother wrote up an article, quite an extensive article, on our history down in this area. And there will be a copy in the museum of when they set up a bookstore. So here's my daughter spent thousands of hours on this research. I spent a few hundred, so turn it over to her. Susan.
Hello. Okay, so now that we know how I got started, I've been doing this for 25 years. I've gone down many trails that have been dead ends. First thing I do when I find a piece of information is I try to disprove it. As soon as I disprove it, I move on. I've spent countless hours. This last thing with Fred, bringing up the witnesses and looking for where could they have come from, I started with Harvey Evans. I mean, who is Harvey? So I really researched New Mexico looking for him there. Went through the Santa Fe census for 1870 and page by page, and there was no Harvey Evans there. I was also looking for where Catherine and Antrim may have stayed before they got married, and none of the names popped out. So I'm going to do that again now that I have more names in my head. So, but I did find a Harvey Evans in New York. And of course everybody knows that Billy the Kid said he was from New York, and nothing's really been proven. Not even close. So I found a Harvey Evans who was in Rome, Oneida County, New York. He was born in 1810, and he died in 1877, and he was quite a wealthy man. By the 1870 census, he was worth $30,000, and back then, that was quite a bit of money. He ran a Seymour Motel. And so then from there, I'm looking for more witnesses of the wedding that were in the area he was in, and I came across a Josephine party. She turned out to be an extremely character. She has a history that we have a small book already being written on her. She was a Union spy, she was a doctor, she was a teacher. She was arrested several times. She had many children, half of them illegitimate, the other half she had with a husband. She got married, when she was about 18 in 1845 in Washington, D.C. She married a lawyer who was 40 years old. And they had 3 children, and he ran off kind of and left her and went to England, and she followed. And she has had many affairs. So he sent her home alone, kept the kids. But his name was Robert Riccardi. Her maiden name was Josephine Fagan. She was born in Virginia. And she had a lover by the name of Milton Thompson. She tried to shoot him in 1872 when he kicked her out of the house that she was performing abortions in. And the bullet went through his face, shot his nephew who was sitting next to him in the streetcar. There's many articles documenting all of her character, everything she did. She killed the nephew and was acquitted of murder. And everybody was all hip hip hooray when she got off. Okay, so she had friends in high places. She's also mentioned in a book written by Rosie Greenway. She was also in the Old Capitol Prison as a Union spy. So there's Josephine's mentioned in there. They knew each other. And then Robert Riccardi, he was born in 1808 in Lewis County, New York. More on him. We looked for Henry. We found Henry in 1850, living with a John Riccardi, listed as his gardener, so I don't know if they were related. In 1855, he was living right next door to Harvey Evans.
Wow.
So pretty close. With the research I'm still continuing on Robert, it looks like there might be a family connection between Robert and Henry in Lewis County. So that's what I'm working on right now. It's a work in progress, always, it never ends. But without Catherine, what good were all these witnesses? They were all living within 20 miles of each other. So when you do an internet research, you put in the search engine and the people pop up and you check on them. Catherine didn't pop up anywhere, but I just kept digging and digging because I don't give up. And I found Catherine McCarty at the perfect age, in the perfect place with these witnesses. She was 30 years old, born in 1830, living in Utica, New York, working for a John Munn and living in his castle. There is no child. She could have been pregnant. There's a 1-year-old William McCarty in the area with a Patrick and a Mary, so whether or not that was her child, their child, it's always open for more research to try to determine. We have another theory that it could be Josephine Fagan may have had a relative named William Fagan, who lived in New York. I still need to make the connection that they were related or not. So his wife died 1870, and he got rid of all his children. They all ended up in different homes. The only one that I couldn't find was his son, Joseph, who was born in 1863, the same year our Joseph was supposed to be born. So still, where did Joseph come from? Still being researched. Don't really believe that he was Billy the Kid's brother, maybe more of a cousin or stepbrother, maybe half-brother. Still researching. But as far as Joseph goes, the last thing that I want to say is I did some research on him in Denver because that's where we know he was. And there's actually 3 or 4 Joseph tantrums in Denver during that time period at different addresses. I've got census after and census and city directories. So he's quite a character himself and probably the most mysterious next to Catherine.
Now comes the home run. Okay. First of all, we go back to what we were talking about to begin with, which was 138 years ago, round about now.
I forgot the numbers.
Okay, I'll hit that. Gosh, I forgot what I was going to say. 138 years ago, roughly speaking this week, that young Englishman came to Lincoln Town. 5 years later, a boy called Billy the Kid was shot dead. 133 years later, he has, and we have, survived. What we've survived is Brushy Bill, Donald Klein with his New York thugs, the Arizona Boy Killer, and films from Johnny McBrown through The Outlaw. I still love that movie. It's just so terrible that you just look at it and go, how could they possibly have made it? Anyway, you've seen it too. Right the way up to Young Guns. But who was he? Who was Billy the Kid? Well, you heard a little bit about the background of what we found. But it wasn't really. The moment came when I said to Gary and Susan, what if all that stuff that we believe that the his stepfather and his mother were married in Santa Fe, and then his brother was there, and they all went to Arizona and lived unhappily ever after. And it seems to me that of all of the findings that we made in this genealogical trek, and believing me, I'm using the word correctly, it was a trek. I'd like to expand a little bit on what Susan told you, if you can bear with it, because some of it is so... The second witness was an extraordinary woman. We're going back to the wedding reception now, and the three civilian witnesses, one of whom was Josie, or Joseph, full stop. And we concluded that in fact could not possibly be Joe, Billy's brother, nor could it be Billy, because neither of them was even a teenager yet. I think I'm right in saying that Joe was 10 and Billy was 14, something like that. And it didn't seem kosher to me that the very, very stern and very, very formal rector of the church in Santa Fe would have had the children sign a wedding record. There were two records, one for the state and one for the church. And I have copies of both of them, and they are in scribble. And that's the information that they give us. On the one hand, it's Henry and Josie, S-E, or Joseph, full stop. Well, what if, remember we were talking about the game the writers play, what if that wasn't Billy and Joe, his brother? What if it was somebody else? And that's when Susie here came up with this incredible woman, Josephine Fagan, who married Robert McCarthy in Washington, D.C. As you've heard already, I mean, she needs a book all to herself. It is really quite incredible. You know, in 1860, after having studied for 4 years in Pennsylvania, at the Pennsylvania Medical University, and now calling herself Virginia Seymour, Josephine set up a medical practice for women, i.e. getting rid of unwanted babies. She returned to New York in February 1862. She was arrested in Washington as a Confederate spy. She went to jail and got into a relationship with the jailmaster. And it turned out, it goes on and on and on. I want somebody to write this book, because it's going to be a huge bestseller if it ever hits paper. Nor did age wither her, I should add. In 1872, only 3 months after performing a botched abortion that led to the death of one Margie Campbell in Albany, Josephine boarded a horse-drawn streetcar in Utica, New York. And bear the name Utica in New York in your minds, because that is where we are looking at the moment for the birth of Billy the Kid. And you heard from Susie that she shot her lover in the face. He managed to turn his head away, otherwise it would have killed him stone dead on the spot, and shot his nephew instead. See, it goes on and on and on, and honestly, I read it again and again and think, come on, that couldn't possibly have happened, but it did. So much so that she's bigger than life in the story, if you see what I mean. So the other people tend to be a little bit discontinued. Henry McCarthy, who would have been the other McCarthy at the wedding, I'm going to get to William in a minute. Henry McCarthy was, again, from the same area. And what we're really interested in is Catherine McCarthy. If this Catherine McCarthy in Utica, I always get mixed up between Utica and the other cities up there. Last of all, but as I said, not by any means the least, we have a Catherine McCarthy who was born in 1829 in New York, who arrived in New York, I beg your pardon, from Liverpool. Oh, goody, my hometown. It's uncertain, but in 1860, a young woman, we believe, is surely our Catherine, pops up in Utica. The other one I get mixed up with is Ithaca. You know, if you do this for a long time, your brain turns very, very strange, I promise you. And on the one hand, it looks very encouraging, but it's a fact, as all researchers in this area know, it's enormously complicated by the fact that the named person might have belonged to which family. You can get a list of maybe 20 McCartys, but it doesn't tell you in any census report whether they were all related to each other. And, well, you have to keep in mind that in a 20-mile radius of at least half a dozen McCarthy families, and as many named Bonnie, could be found in this one small area. What I like about it the best of all is that while Catherine, the one we think is Catherine, who was working in this house in Utica, right around the corner, literally 2 houses away, were 2 men called Bonnie. And you could hypothesize, but never prove, that somehow or other Catherine met one of the Bonnies, probably the younger brother, and well, things happen, as you know, and she was living in a servant's position in a very large rich man's house. So obviously had no place to have a baby there, so maybe the baby was then farmed out to some other members of the family, like the one that Susan told you about, who lived in the same area and only appeared once mysteriously. They disappear from the records after that. It is a constantly delicate situation that you find yourself in. You want it to be this way. God, this would be perfect. Here's 2 bloody, and there's 3 bloody, and you go, start staring, everything that does, start, prove it! Well, we're getting towards where we can. And I don't know, did Catherine go to St. Louis, as is possible? Did she go to run the job? Because there was a lodging house there that was owned by guess who? Our dear friend Josephine was there again. And all I can tell you, and I wish it were more, this looks awfully promising, and we are working upon it, but it ain't a fact. It's a proposition. And here at the end, we believe that we now have a fairly convincing world for Billy the Kid to have been born into. What I like most about it all is when he needed a pen name, when he needed another name than Henry McCarthy. Guess which the one was he chose? Bonnie. Could he possibly been having an awful lot of fun with Governor Wallace when he knew that it was going to hit the newspapers, and somewhere up in Utica or wherever his possible father now was, he's going to say, you know, that's the craziest thing. I've just been reading that there's a guy there's a guy in New Mexico who calls himself William Henry Bonnie. That's my name. How dare he? And maybe he had a little crawl into the corner and thought, oh God, I hope nobody ever finds comes out. What I'm trying to do here, as you might imagine, is to put a little bit of humanity onto statistics. This is the nearest I have ever come to saying to a group of people like yourselves, I think this is Billy the Kid. That's where he was born, and that's who he is. And one of the other things that I want one of you to do, I don't care who it is, write the biography of Josephine Carty. There's one final hypothesis, by the way, because here's another problem that this brings up. Billy had a brother, Joe, which was how the mix-up may have started in the original marriage records. Well, this genius of a woman here has found that there is indeed a Joseph whose real name was Fagin, and later became Andrew, and may have been sent from New York City, which was where he was found in 1870 in the censuses. Those people in those, we forget, this is a little plea that I want to give you. Don't forget how far and how tough and how determined those people who came from the East and got here and made a life were. And when you say, you mean they traveled 1,800 miles to go to a wedding? And the answer would be, I think, from all of us, given who it was, that we don't know the relationship between Josie and Catherine. But if, for instance, it was a stepdaughter or an illegitimate child, who the hell knows? With that woman, she was dropping babies like parachutists. It might well be, ladies and gentlemen, it might well be that we have solved the mystery of who Billy the Kid was and whence he came. I say that, but don't forget, this is a work in progress, and it belongs to you as much as it belongs to us. So go out now and find the rest of the story and send it to me with a very large check. Thank you. Now I'll take orders. Would you like to ask questions? Anybody? Oh, good.
Oh, come on, somebody's got to have
All
a
right.
question.
Yes, you've got one at the back. Yes, sir.
Well, I like the fact that you said you played what if. When Tunstall was driving his horses and met his demise, what if Nolan had paid the kid to conveniently, as he was riding drag, be off chasing wild turkeys, leaving the back end open for the subposse to come and take care of their business?
That's not a question, that's an essay. You think there was some foul play there in the death of John Tunstall?
Well, I don't think it's beyond the pale for Nolan to have paid through maybe Jesse Evans and their relationship with the kid to conveniently leave the tail end open with him Weedman up in the hills supposedly chasing wild turkeys. Seems coincidental to me.
And how are you following that story through, sir?
When you say what if, you think it's a theory that
It's
his personality is a theory that's plausible?
It's a way of making the idea real. You can't look at the paper and say, this doesn't make any damn sense at all, but what if that was that and this was this? Then it would kind of work. I haven't got the what if, but if I can find the what if, that will be it. I don't know. I don't really find anything terribly controversial in how Tunstall was killed, apart from the fact that it was a bloody mess. Why would the kid have been implicated in that?
I think it would be a financial reason. It's reported that Nolan had paid Wilson to have Casey killed, so it's not beyond his personality to pay somebody to get rid of a competitor.
Well, I think, if I may say so, you've got a very good what if there. Now all you've got to do is go out and document it. See, think of yourself where you're sitting. Forget all these other people here now, it's just you and me. What are you going to use to prove your proposition?
Well, it's hard to prove a conspiracy, but I'm not a historian as a student, so I feel like I can engage in hypothesis and theory.
Everybody's a student. I'm a student, I've been doing it for 70 years. You have to follow it through, you have to document it, you have to present it, and you have to have it accepted. Now, we're roughly speaking about stage 3 in the one we're talking here today about. But first of all, you've got to do the legwork, sir. And believe you me, Billy the Kid is one of the longest legwork jobs I have ever even encountered, let alone done. It's only in this last 6 months or so that I've actually felt I know who he was. I think I know who he was. I cannot tell you that I have proven that he is who I think he is. We can't tell you. Susan can't tell you. Gary can't tell you. But you come up with a better proposition would be my answer to that. And the answer to your question is the same one. You put the proposition forward in front of the rest of the world and watch them fall upon you like a pack of jackals. But you've got to do it if you're going to do it. Next, sir.
Have you found a picture of Josie?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
Can I buy it?
Yes. On the basis of your last purchases, sir, this is going to be $3 million.
Wow.
Is she cute?
You bet your boots she was cute. What my mother used to call cuter than custard, you know, I mean, really. She's such a, somebody's got to write a biography of this woman. It's fantastic. It's better than any of the clunky things that you see in paperback. It's a real wonderful story. And if she's Billy the Kid's auntie, yikes! But we got to do that. So we sit down, we go home, and we do some more research. And one of these days, maybe, we'll be back here on a stretcher. I don't know. I'm handing the torch over. You guys go forward. Sir, again.
Could she be Billy's kid's mother?
That's a good question. Susan? Could she be Billy the Kid's mother?
I played with that idea quite a bit.
I'll bet you did.
It's possible.
You see, that the trouble with the census records, as I don't need to tell you, sir, is that it doesn't separate people into family groups. It just says Joe Bloggs, Bill Bloggs, Harry Bloggs, Tom Bloggs, cousins, aunts, uncles, Mary, whatever. And finding that detail requires you to go to the place itself and dig real deep. Maybe there's something in the newspapers up there that we've never encountered. Maybe there's some clue, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you, let me put it another way. If I go up there and find it, what are you going to pay me?
I'll negotiate with you.
Okay. Okay. Another question, anybody?
Can you recap briefly any kind of date certain or approximate date of Billy's birth according to this research, and that it is Utica or Utica area, or specifically Utica?
I'll wait till Susan gets back to the counter to do that. Are you ready to answer that question, Susan, or did you hear it? Do we know Billy's birthday?
No.
Do we know where it took place? Yes, it's in Utica. Do we know the year?
I'm thinking 59, 60.
59 to 60, right, which fits the legend. More work to be done in the department, I'm afraid. We're not past that point yet. Don't forget, the research keeps going on, but you have to make your statements when you get a chance to do them. I would think very little of myself if I come to Lincoln and not told anybody what we're telling you today. Yes, at the back?
Nolan. My name is Bob Bovay. I was working on the Lincoln ordinance back in the 1970s and 1971. I was talking to Ed Pinfield, who ran the Tunstall store and had the house next door. And we got around to talking about Tunstall and McSween and the two little crosses right behind the store. And I made the comment that that didn't seem like it was necessarily appropriate, the two little wood crosses that you see. And he said, no, it was the old Lincoln Memorial group. He said they had put those crosses in there. He said they aren't buried there. And I said, oh yeah, you know, where are they buried? This is Ed Pinfield. And he said they're buried right over there where there was a garage that had collapsed behind the Pinfield house next door to the store. He said, that's where they're buried. And I said, oh yeah, and how would you know that? And he said, when I was a little boy, Susan McSween would come up and put flowers on her husband's grave, and I would talk to her. And it brought it all back to me, and my question is why, if in fact, with your being the biographer of Tunstall, why have they not appropriately been memorialized, or their troop graves documented, if that in fact is where they're buried?
That's a good, long, old story. Ed Penfield was a mischievous old gentleman. I asked him the same questions, and he pointed to the outhouse. And he said, they're underneath the outhouse. And every time I go in there, in the rest of the story, do you? He was a mischievous old man, but he was telling the truth. Probably that's where they are buried. And the family has resolutely refused, and even in Ed's time, his wife would not allow anybody to even think about digging up the garden or letting tourists in to see where it might be, because she didn't want no damn tourists tramping all over her backyard. And so the thing went past, and in the end, rather than have nothing to remember them by, the state decided to put those two crosses in back of the store. It's not where they're buried, and somewhere in back there may well be, one day, an opportunity to go and disinter what may be there. But I suspect it won't be much. It's a long time. Remember, it's 130-something years.
I thought the story was, though, that there actually was a coffin that Tunstall made, because there were plans at one time to take Tunstall back to England, that he actually was involved and was in a coffin. And I think Shields was involved in that, but that was my understanding, that there may have been just a wooden coffin for McSween, but there actually was a metal type coffin that was bought for Tunstall in anticipation of him being taken back to his home overseas. Have you ever heard that story?
I've heard rumors of it. I know nothing of it from the family. There was no record of anybody ever having been paid to put him in a coffin. And I can't imagine how much it would have cost to ship him back. But that having been said, no, I don't agree with that at all. I think it's better to have some kind of a marker than none whatsoever, which would be the case if you were insisting on it being a 100% accurate thing. And most of the places that you go to today are not necessarily actually the place where the body is. May well be is about as much as you can get to with that particular proposition. And maybe one day the house will change hands, or somebody will come up with a new way of looking into the earth that doesn't require you to dig it. In fact, I think there is such a thing as that. And maybe if you could get permission to. But again, you see, they'd say, well, no, that old man said to me, no son of a bitch is going on my garden, I can tell you that. And he took great pleasure in reminding me of his bodily functions. Sorry about the long-windedness of that one. Okay, another. Yes, sir. Madam, I'm sorry.
Who's Josephine Fagan married?
She married about 6 people, didn't she?
She married Robert McCarthy.
To start with.
No, that was her only marriage.
All the rest of them were illegal?
Aliases. She used
She married a lot of people, but not under the same
Robert
name.
McCarty.
Yes,
He's from Lewis County, New York. Born in 1808.
Then I see a genealogist here, look out. Are you a genealogist? Yeah. Yes, behind there, yes.
What would the population of Utica have been in that time? How large of a population would Utica have had in that time?
Work in progress, darling. We're waiting
Okay.
for an opportunity to go up there and do some real digging.
Okay.
Because there are lots of things that aren't on the internet. For instance, I'd like to know about these two houses that were owned by the Bonnie boys, and the big house where Billy's mother
Where she worked.
was working. I'd love to see them today, and I've heard from people who know it that they in fact are now, they're all apartment houses now, but they were grand houses. So we're not talking about people scratching a living. And it would be very interesting to see if there's some real documentation or proof that we can get that what these places were like and what the gossip was is also a very useful way of finding stuff out. But as I said to you, and will continue to say probably till they pat me in the face with a spade, this is a work in progress. And so far, it's not finished. Yes, ma'am.
Has anyone done any DNA testing on the supposed child of Billy Kid and his Mexican girlfriend?
Where would that be? The child?
The child, she married a man who was a friend, an older man.
Who's she? Sorry, start at the beginning.
Paulita.
Oh, Paulita Maxwell. Okay.
Yes. And she married a man who was some years older than her, and she had a male son. And I've seen some writings, comparisons, that the son looks very much like the picture of Billy's here. So I'm wondering, has anyone followed that line and done any DNA research on any male descendants of that line? In which case, then you could find some Bonnies in New York, do some comparative tests, and maybe find out who was the father.
I don't know that that will ever happen. But even if we said right this minute, why, that's a jolly good idea, let's do it. Have you any idea at all what that would cost? Just in clearances to get at the graves and dig them up?
You don't have to find the living descendants today.
I
Maybe get them to just.
think Susan would like to say something just now.
I have found a family tree of the Bonnies, and there's a great resemblance. I showed through pictures. I've got some pictures here of who may have been his family, and there's a big resemblance. They've got the piercing blue eyes. They've got the kind of like the one eyebrow that kind of sparks up, and the jawline. It's a really good likelihood that this is his gene. And
Well, the only way you can compare it is if you found a child.
but we don't have any DNA on Billy the Kid, so I don't know. if
What was
that's
the
ever
name
happened.
of the man that she married?
Paulita Maxwell.
Maxwell was her brother's name, wasn't it? Wasn't she a Maxwell?
I think that years
That's
and years
amazing.
ago, I may have looked for that and discounted it. Don't remember why. I have to look it up again. I search everything I hear.
I'm just curious.
Brushy Bill Roberts, I blew
I
him
did
off right
30 years of
away.
work on one line, thinking up my husband's line. We did DNA tests, 30 years of work down the drain. He came from the Vikings, he's not the French.
Well,
So
there's
then I
no
had to
step
start all
brothers.
Well, as you probably gathered just from this afternoon, there are an awful lot of threads that could be followed. And there's only little us what's doing it, love. You know, you need an army to do this kind of work, really. I won't go so far as to slang anybody else, but there are an awful lot of historical societies around the world who can do this stuff, but they consider it to be demeaning. it's not important, you know. Give me George, you know, Richard III, who was buried in a car park in England. That's wonderful. But Billy the Kid, are you kidding me? You want me to spend money on Billy the Kid? Or even Billy the Kid's baby? Ha! What will the payoff be?
But you have to find a living and descendant of Billy, who is curious about his ancestry.
We're on the trail. If we find out where he came from and who he was, maybe then.
I've got 30 more years to do on my own life.
Well, Susie and I have already made a pact. When we find out who this family subsidiary will be, we're going to charge them a lot of money for the information. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Paulita. Is Paulita Maxwell have any Spanish ancestry?
No. She was, I think, a third French, a third American, and a third something else, but none of it was Hispanic. Her father was not Hispanic. She was, yes.
She was Hispanic?
Yes, I think so.
So then Paulita would have...
She would have some traces of it, yes, but it was outnumbered by the riches of the backstory of Lucy and Maxwell. Have you any idea what this job is like about being confused? We're confused all the damn time, lady. No, I've never heard it said that she, and I seem to remember I'm not much of an expert on that, I'm afraid. I could look it up for you later if I could get to my library. If you can wait for about a fortnight, I'll send you a letter.
Paulita is Hispanic name and her relative Luis Maxwell is Hispanic name.
Yes, he was very involved with the Hispanic people of the state, up in the north there, you know, and I'm not, for the second of a fraction, arguing your point. I don't know the answer, and I wouldn't try to be definitive about it, but I know that there was French and Spanish and American in there.
What coincidence, I'm Spanish and French also.
I've got to leave that woman. I'll feel the two. Everybody's got a load of that kind to carry. You know, it's very difficult to get it because a lot of people don't want you to go there. However, sorry. Anybody else before we call it an afternoon? Do I consider Billy the Kid to be truthful? Good question. Yes. I'll tell you why. Because when he first came on the scene as a human being, he was known as Henry McCarty, not Billy. All the time he was in Lincoln, in Arizona, I beg your pardon, he was a McCarty. When he came to New Mexico, he was still a McCarty for a while. And sometimes he was other things as well, but he never used the name until, I think, just before he met up with Lew Wallace. But at some point in his life, he decided that he needed to change his name, and the name he chose was the name of his father, not his William. His father was not called William, but he definitely was a Bonnie. And no doubt he got that from his mother's name. She said, "Your daddy is not here, he lives in New York State, and his name is Bonnie. You be proud of that because you're a good boy." And so he said, "As of now, ladies and gents, my name is William Bonnie." And he did it, he flaunted it. And so I think that was honest. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't know anything that he ever promised to do that he didn't do. And I think if you look at his, sorry, I'm going to call it a career, that's not quite the right word for it, his appearance and disappearance, or whatever you like, all the time he was around, And Bob McCubbin and I have had an argument about this, and no doubt I'll have an argument with the editor of True West magazine, which is, I had contended that you cannot find him lying, ever, on the record. Wherever he's on the record, he's telling the truth. Okay, sometimes he's not telling all the truth, but you can't fault him. You can't say, God, that's an outright lie. He must have been a real crooked snook. No. Everything he says is exactly what he experienced or knew. And if he knew something that he didn't think was very healthy to know, he didn't say anything about it at all. And if you'd like, Doctor, have a go at me later when you've had a chance to check the books. I think, let's take a census of it. How would you vote, folks? Honest or dishonest? Honest first. Dishonest? Oh, it's a walkover. You know, he's honest.
No.
Any more, or shall we call it a day, folks? Don't. One more, wait. One more, Doctor. You've got a question, sir?
No, I didn't know.
Good show.
Right there.
Yep, sing out, Louise.
Is the present Flying H Ranch the same property that Tunstall owns? It's, the present one is south of Mayville, southeast of Mayville.
I know where it is, yes, I've been there a few times. I'm not a land expert, but largely, yes. There's a little bit of the one next door, I think he had as well, the original old Flying H. And the Tunstall's are still annoyed like that. Okay. Any more? Thank you very much. An announcement from our patron here.
2 buildings down this way is the Dolan's house, and they are sponsoring a reception and a book signing for Mr. Nolan. If as you leave here, you want to go down and talk to Fred Moore, get him to sign a book, or just visit, please go down. Is that okay, Beth?
That's fine, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all. Thank you.